welcome everybody and good morning. My name's Samira Ahmed, and I think it's fair to say it feels like a real privilege to have been asked to chair the annual conference for the General Medical Council. A warm welcome to all of you who are joining us online and to those in the room in London. How great to all be back in a room together. Today is all about how we can work together to support doctors in delivering good care for patients. And I don't need to tell any of you that we're meeting after an incredibly strange year, indeed 2 years, as well as COVID. There have been underlying issues that have been exposed in recent months about poor care, notably a scandal around maternity provision. There have been news stories about predatory individuals that the council's had to deal with. And now we know the news headlines are dominated by issues around waiting lists. There's so much pressure on so many exhausted and hard-working NHS professionals and so many anxieties. So it feels like a really important time to be talking in a positive way about lessons learned, about issues that remain, and looking to the future. The idea of this event is to be truly interactive, so we do plan to involve you, the audience, wherever possible in our plenary sessions here together, which I'll be chairing, and each workshop. They're all designed to allow a good amount of time for discussion and debate. And if you are attending online, you can put your questions in the right-hand sidebar. And if you're attending in person, you can download the event app to submit your questions. So this morning's sessions, we're going to be joined by Professor Dame Carrie MacEwen, Acting Chair of the GMC, and Dr. Farzana Hussain, who's the GP Principal at the Project Surgery in Newham, East London. And in the afternoon, we're delighted to welcome Chloe Abe and Tunuke Awe, co-founders of 5X More, and also Charlie Massey, who's the Chief Executive of the GMC. So a kind of really important mixture of expertise from different aspects, some very frontline, some more sort of strategic. We aren't expecting any fire drills today, just being practical for those of you who are here. So if the fire alarm does go off, please do follow instructions given by our fire wardens or leave by the nearest exit. There'll be plenty of time to network and break and talk. So start thinking about what questions you might like to ask, but let me welcome our first speaker, our keynote speaker, Acting Chair of the GMC, Professor Dame Carrie MacEwen. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It really is a pleasure to be able to welcome you to this year's GMC conference, and it's lovely to see so many joining us in person, as well as there's a large number online as well, of which we will not be aware, but they are definitely here. So being able to stand here and look at an audience instead of a number of disembodied faces on a screen still feels like quite a novelty. And a very pleasant one at that. And I've heard many people this morning saying how pleased they are to be able to meet people one-on-one. The last time we held a conference in person was in 2019. I was in the audience, and that seems like a very long time ago. And how blissfully unaware we were at that time of what the next couple of years was going to bring. At that conference, our chair was my colleague and very dear friend, Dame Claire Marks. And I took on the role of acting chair of the GMC in July last year, when Claire very sadly had to step down due to ill health. I would, of course, rather have taken up this position under almost any other circumstances. But Claire had made such a strong start to her tenure and had such sound priorities that I have felt honoured to be able to take the reins for a time, to be able to continue some of the important conversations and relationships that Claire started, and to build on these foundations. And that is why I'm particularly delighted to announce that from next year onwards, doctors who join the GMC as part of the Clinical Fellowship Programme will be known as Marks Fellows. Our Clinical Fellowship Programme is a valuable way for the GMC to forge strong links with the profession. Clinical fellows bring a wealth of experience and knowledge to their roles and are a huge asset to the organisation. Both parties benefit from a productive exchange of insights and perspectives. And it is these kinds of supportive links between the regulator and the profession that I know Claire was always very passionate about. So we're grateful to Claire for agreeing to lend her name to our clinical fellowship programme, and I'm sure that our Marks Fellows of the future will be a fitting tribute to everything she has achieved. When I first joined the GMC as a member of council, I often heard staff saying that patient safety was at the heart of everything that we do. That's undoubtedly true for the GMC as a regulator, but it also reflects the purpose and sentiment of every doctor. Indeed, those of you here today who are not doctors would say the same, because overall, the goal for anyone working in healthcare is to make sure that the treatment and care are of the highest standards. And it's what our patients both deserve and expect. We're all working towards that same end. Our primary role as a regulator is to protect patients. And it's through supporting doctors and also that wider healthcare system that we're able to do it. However, that healthcare system is under extreme pressure. And the pandemic has certainly intensified that pressure. However, I think we would all recognise that COVID-19 itself was not the underlying cause of the pressure or the problem, but it's exacerbated it and also brought it more into the public conscious. It's inevitable in any walk of life that sustained pressure increases the risk of error. So it won't come as a surprise to learn that by alleviating these pressures in whichever way we can is key to patient safety. We also need to recognise that one-size-fits-all solutions don't exist for every problem. The GMC covers all 4 countries of the UK, and each has its own particular challenges in healthcare, as well as operating in different political backdrops. These differences have rarely been clearer than they were during the pandemic, when the health services in each country were very publicly working to slightly different rules and restrictions. Having said that, there is still a huge amount of common ground, and some practical solutions are widely applicable. I suspect there's not a person in this room from England, Wales, Northern Ireland, or my home nation of Scotland who wouldn't welcome more equipment, more space, and better IT, for example. And these key practicalities are key because the profession is only as good as its people, and its people can only be at their best in environments that enable them to provide the best care they can, and hopefully to thrive. It's those environments that are all too often lacking. They are preventing doctors from reaching their full potential by undermining their confidence, or not allowing them to speak up, or not treating them fairly. We've seen some disturbing reports of late of large-scale system failures in healthcare, with some devastating consequences for patients. The Ockenden report into maternity care is the most recent and tells the same story as many previous reports. That of many factors at play in failures on that scale, but with one common link, which is not connected with clinical expertise, but it's that thing called workplace culture. We can break that down into different elements. There might be bullying, poor communication, a lack of respect for colleagues, lack of transparency, or just plain poor leadership. But ultimately, these things all add up to one common overall sum, and that is a toxic environment or culture. And when we listen to what doctors tell us about their work, we can see that workplace culture has a huge impact, not only on their job satisfaction, but more importantly, on their ability to care for patients. And that adds up to a double whammy, as failure to provide optimal care provides further psychological trauma to the doctors involved. But we also know that doctors from ethnic minority backgrounds and doctors with disabilities have a significantly poorer experience of working in the UK health service. And that is not only wrong, but it also means that we run the risk of losing talented clinicians at a time when they're needed more than ever. In addition, you'll no doubt be aware of some distressing accounts in the media of sexual harassment and even sexual assaults on doctors. When women in medicine report this sort of behaviour as something that's widespread, rather than a shocking one-off, this suggests that a more general lack of respect for colleagues might be the root cause. All these things have a direct impact on patient safety, on doctors' well-being, and on their desire to remain in the profession. Of course, that's not to say that fatigue, burnout, and overwork aren't also factors. And of course they are. But even in a highly pressurised environment, doctors are best able to cope with these challenges if the accepted culture is one of compassion, openness, and inclusion. I see it very much that the GMC's role is to support doctors, but also to work with employers and all other stakeholders in building those cultures. At a time when the profession is facing high levels of burnout and workforce retention is an urgent priority, we simply cannot afford not to act. This is quite a challenge. Culture change doesn't happen overnight, but it is people who create cultures, and we need to do all we can to empower doctors to be a key part of that change. In fact, we think it's so important to the profession that we're making positive behaviours and supportive cultures part of the most fundamental guidance that sets out standards expected from doctors. That guidance is, of course, good medical practice. Put simply, good medical practice describes what it means to be a good doctor. It's nearly 10 years since we last updated it, and although the fundamental principles remain the same, it needs to be brought up to date to mirror changes in society. There's a lot more to being a good doctor than just clinical expertise. There's relationships, the doctor-patient relationship, our relationship with the wider population, and our relationships and responsibilities to our colleagues. Our proposed updates to good medical practice are now out for consultation, and I hope that you will manage to find time to feedback and comment. The draft is a result of many months of working with doctors, employers, stakeholders, and patient representatives. And this consultation is your chance to tell us if we've got it right, and if you think we've not got it right, to tell us how to improve it. The proposed updates to good medical practice make it explicitly clear that doctors have a duty not to harass, bully, or discriminate against anyone. And just as importantly, doctors must act if they become aware of such behaviours from colleagues and feel empowered to support others to act. These points are aimed at tackling the most serious and harmful behaviours. But we go further than that. It's not just preventing destructive behaviours, but in developing strong, positive ways of working together. We know from our broad engagement that simply working effectively in multidisciplinary teams, sharing knowledge and learning and respecting each other's skills and expertise all make a huge difference to workplace cultures and job satisfaction. So we're proposing, in addition, that this will be part of good medical practice. Finally, supportive cultures need supportive leaders. And when I say leaders, I don't just mean the most senior staff. All doctors need leadership skills that are right for their role, and good medical practice is clear on that. All doctors are leaders. And to be clear about that, leadership just isn't about management, delegation, and advice. In fact, far from it, it's about being a role model and playing our part in collectively shaping services and cultures that are positive and welcoming, creating places in which doctors and others want to work and where they want to stay, places where patients can be safest. Good medical practice is not a prescriptive rulebook. It's a supportive framework, a guide for doctors that they can and want to apply to their practice. From the moment a student enrolls in medical school, good medical practice sums up everything that they are working towards. Those principles form the backbone of their practice right up until the day they retire. The fact that we are updating something so fundamental to include those wider workplace behaviours is a measure of how important we think these are. For doctors' well-being, of course, but also for the benefit of our health services and for the standard of care we provide. And it's not just for clinicians. Employers, education bodies, and other regulators all have a role in this too. I think the key thing is that no one can do this alone. Changing culture is far-reaching and requires wide buy-in. If we don't look after our doctors, they can't look after their patients. So strong, compassionate leadership means compassionate cultures, and compassionate cultures means compassionate care. This conference is going to provide good opportunities to discuss this further, and I look forward to be part of that. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I should say, do take the opportunity, if you have any questions, whether you're in the room or you're watching online, do submit them using the app or on that tab thing. And I can see the questions and put them to Carrie. There are a lot of different things you talked about there. One of them you talked about how sustained pressure raises the risks of error. And of course, that's exactly what the NHS has been through in the last 2 years. Can you tell us a bit more about how far you've seen measurable evidence of how that's coming through in terms of what the GMC is getting in terms of its workload?
Well, I think that it's one of these things that's going to take a while to come through, to be perfectly honest. I think people are so busy at the moment trying to catch up with what's going on. But we have certainly heard from many quarters that there are concerns that doctors feel that they're unable to work to the best of their ability because of either patients waiting a long time to come to see them, or there are insufficient staff available, or the place that they're delivering care is not where they would normally be giving care. So we've had to contact the profession to say to them, we recognise this, we know that these things are problematic, and we sympathise with them, and we will take all that into account should there be any issues.
One of the other things, going back to the kind of start of people's careers, is we know the terrible impact COVID's had on people's university education. So for medical students who are embarking on that career as doctors, what are your observations about the impact COVID's had on their training and how confident you are that they're being educated in a way that you want for all the things that you're trying to change in the workplace culture?
That's a really, really good question, because I think there's two sides to that. One of the things that happened at the beginning of COVID was students were accelerated in a way into the workplace, and the feedback from that has been extremely positive. They really felt that they were being empowered to do something that they had been sort of learning to do for the last 5 years or so. So that was really, really positive. And I think there's more work needing to be done on that to see how that can be embedded further. But the other thing is that students obviously have not been given the clinical experience and exposure that they might have normally had, and that has made them quite nervous and quite anxious. But it's not just, it's not just students, it's actually some of the junior doctors. They've worked their entire 2 years in pandemic environment. So they found that quite difficult, and I think that a lot of people are going to need a lot of support and recognise the issues that they are facing, but also to try and learn the positives from it as well.
Got a question that's come in. How have medical students been involved in the update to the good medical practice, just sort of talking about medical students?
Well, we have involved a huge number of people involved in the updating of good medical practice. And in fact, I was in Northern Ireland last week speaking to a group of medical students and indicating to them that this is now out to consultation, and that we want to make sure that every medical school in the country distributes it to get the feedback, not just from the medical school themselves, very interested in that, but really interested in how medical students see this impacting on their future lives, because they have to buy into it from the very beginning.
Claire Gerarda, former head of College of GPs, I wonder how, if a doctor were accused of not leading, how this evidence can be provided one way or another, because you have been talking a lot about the importance of leadership.
Well, the leaders...
Or questions.
So, lots of questions. So, how would they demonstrate that how would we be interested that they weren't
Can we
leading?
see the question
Yeah,
back?
sorry.
You deleted it, but if you could share us the answered questions, maybe. There you go, it's at the bottom. I wonder how, if a doctor were accused of not leading, how this evidence can be provided one way or another.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think leadership is something that we should all be involved in, but how does one define leadership? I think that's one of the problems that is difficult, because it's not, as I've said, it's not to do with being in a senior position, it's not to do with necessarily organising or managing people. It's to do with the way you behave, that you're wanting to make quality improvement changes, you want to make things better for your patients, for your colleagues, and that you are prepared to stand up and say that should it be the case. It's difficult. I think there's a double negative here. If somebody is comfortable with the way they're working, they don't feel there's changes to be made, I think it's very difficult to indicate that they're not leading when they feel that they're actually quite comfortable in the situation that they're in.
Yeah, and I think it's clearly an area that's people in the conference are recognising is a sensitive one. So Gordon Miles' question, does system pressure reduce the opportunity for leaders and those working in the system to adopt a supportive culture? Just as sustained pressure raising risk of clinical error, does it also contribute to shape the culture negatively? I think that's the concern. You can talk all you like about a positive culture, but if there's all this pressure going on, how you define it and who's deciding what's good leadership is really debatable.
It's extremely difficult. I mean, I don't think anybody gets up in the morning and thinks, I'm going to go in and I'm going to be difficult with my colleagues today, and I'm going to be a bit rushed with my patients. The problem is you get into that situation and there are people, nurses saying you've got to do this, there's patients who say they're not, they've got that, and the pressure mounts up, and you just can't do anything else except sort of charge your way through the day and hope that you get out the other side. So what we've got to try and do is recognise that can happen and have people alerted to it, because it can be really, really unpleasant with that pressure on.
Yeah. A question that's coming from a Richard H. To encourage healthier team working, should we facilitate more multi-professional education and training? For example, doctors plus nurses plus others?
Yes, absolutely. And when I think back to when I was a medical student, there was absolutely, doctors were educated completely differently from the rest of the healthcare workforce. But there's been a huge move to change that, and it is right and proper. There's simulated ward rounds where everybody's involved in the training programme, and there's working together and learning together as part of teamwork. It's absolutely essential. And one of the things that came out of some work that we did with Plymouth University was to indicate that doctors do feel, and this is the very early doctors, foundation year doctors, some of them feel quite prepared in some ways clinically, they feel prepared, communication, they feel prepared, but they don't really feel prepared for teamwork. So that's work that we're going to have to work on and see if we can do something to make that better.
You talked about making supportive cultures, and in fact all the last few questions have really been around that. How are you going about making them? And in a sense, it's all very well defining it and saying what a good supportive culture is, but I hear so much anecdotally, as a journalist, about the reality which is not supportive. What are your thoughts about that gap?
Well, I think the important thing is that, one, it is recognised because, as you say, it can so much brushed under the carpet because of high-pressure environments. And the second thing is that, having recognised it, everybody realises they've got to contribute to it. It's not something that anybody can do alone. Employers are involved, education deans, postgraduate deans, undergraduate deans, the GMC, all regulators. Everybody has to be involved in that because if one part of the wheels come off, the whole thing falls over. So everybody has to recognise that they have to do it and actually take steps to do that. I mean, I always think of this a bit like, go back 30 years, women in medicine were not progressing, and that was largely because they couldn't put the hours in. Now, everybody recognised that. They said, right, we need to, less than full-time training. And I said, yeah, that's a great idea. But if you didn't have the colleges buying in for training and the deans buying in for making programmes that worked and the departments buying in for allowing people to work part-time and the employer prepared to do that and the GMC, everybody needed to be involved in that. And it's exactly the same here. We need to make sure that everybody recognises and contributes positively.
Yeah, there's also an issue which I know will come up again during the day about biases and unconscious biases. And you'll know there is data that's been gathered to suggest that doctors from minority backgrounds tend to get more complaints raised, and there are all kinds of, there are reasonable questions to be asked about that. Yeah. What are your thoughts about this and addressing that?
Well, this is something that the GMC is very aware of and is very concerned about. And because of that, the differential, the disproportionate referral of doctors, it's twice as much from ethnic minority doctors who are trained in the UK, who come from the UK, and 3 times for doctors who've been trained abroad. So that is a concern to us. So with that in mind, we carried out a very important piece of work to get under the skin of this. It's all very fine knowing about it, but why is it? And that was Fair to Refer, and that has given the background as to what's happening here. And the next step of that is that we have set ourselves a target to eliminate that disproportional referral rate. Now, we can all very fine, we don't actually have any control over what's referred to us. What we've got to do is deal with it when it comes in. So what we're doing is we're working with hospitals, with employers, with what we call responsible officers, who are the GMC people on the ground who will often be referring people in. We are working with them, sharing best practice, looking at the information we got from Fair to Refer to make sure that we're getting changes, and also with education bodies as well. So we're working very hard on that at the moment because we recognise it's a real problem.
What's your target then for eliminating that bias?
5 years.
5 years from now. Okay.
Yeah, and we have some information back from the first year, and it shows that there's a shift, but we need to keep working on it.
Fine. With the questions, there was one that I think had 2 upticks, which was about appraisals. I wonder if you can just scroll back through them a bit. I don't know if it's just disappeared. Sorry? That's fine, I can remember it. So there was a question about how far appraisal that can be used to be part of the problem when you're thinking about kind of complaints and toxic workplace cultures.
Yeah, appraisal is something that is it's very important. Appraisal's been on the go for a long, long time before revalidation came in. The appraisal itself is actually not owned by the GMC. It's part of plays into the revalidation process. But the contents of revalidation, of appraisal, come from the employer and from the specialties, often the colleges and so on. So we recognise that has sometimes become a huge issue for doctors who've got to gather so much evidence and put so much into it. And in fact, it's not become the positive experience that it should be. And I've had many, many experiences of appraisal, and it can be a really positive experience if we sit down, we look what we're doing and how we're going to move forward. But in some cases, it's just become a really difficult process. So we're looking into that and making changes to it in order to make sure, working not on our own, but with, as I say, many other partners, in order to try and make sure that we make that a really positive experience and not something that's difficult and another hurdle to go over.
Excellent. Question from Martin Marshall. What are the GMC's views on the size of the medical workforce and the extent to which what doctors do can be done by other health professionals?
And that's a really good question, and it's a really important one, because we know that we've got an ageing population. We know that healthcare is really not got the workforce that it needs. So we have to think of different ways of providing care and making sure that, first of all, that doctors are trained so that they are providing the care that what can doctors only do, and make sure that they do that and they concentrate on these important things, and also that they're trained in a way that means they're flexible and it's a sustainable way of working. But we also need to look at the wider workforce, work out who else can work with us to make sure we get the best care for patients, because doctors aren't the best people to provide all forms of care, and we really do need to recognise that and work with the wider team.
Question about the new GMP, which speaks to cultural changes and behavioural changes. You mentioned this issue in your keynote speech as well. What role do you see the GMC having in relation to sexual harassers and the support of victims? We have seen some awful cases come up in the news.
Well, we have put out a statement to indicate that obviously this is completely unacceptable behaviour, and we don't condone it in any way, obviously. But we also are working further. This is quite a complex field, and I think that, again, there's more that needs to be understood on, and we're working with other people to try and make sure that we get the best information and advice and guidance in order to deal with this, because it's not something that in any form is acceptable.
I know, but it's still going on, isn't it?
It is, and again,
in other parts of society too, but I find it amazing the scale of what does get uncovered when it gets all the way through the GMC and upheld.
Yes, no, I mean, I did mention earlier, about what happened with women 30 years ago. The sexism was absolutely blatant then, and we sort of think we've sorted it. Well, we haven't. It is still there, and we have to make sure that it is recognised, it's addressed, and again, help people, to challenge people and make sure that other people are supported when it comes to that. Okay. The culture of being closed, not listening, it has got to go. We have to take people's complaints seriously.
2 questions I want to sneak in the time we have, which one of them just follows on from that. So if we take it to the other end and the beginning of people's careers, how would you educate, empower and promote medical students and junior doctors to take on leadership responsibilities? And to some extent, I guess I'm asking, how far are the younger doctors entering the profession being suitably encouraged and empowered to be able to speak up about what isn't right and help be the change that you want to see?
Yeah, I think that what they need to do is recognise that they are there on the ground. They're able to see what changes can be made that are incredibly practical and sensible, and that they are there as a role model as well. That they must make sure that if they see something, they're prepared to stand up for it. If they want to make changes, they make sure that they.
But how do they
ask
do that?
about
Because
it.
we know why people don't, because they're frightened.
Yes, no, exactly, and I think that is right. And I think that this is where we need to make sure that there is this power struggle in a way that people still see. But I actually think it's better than it was. I think that people feel now that they're more part of. The hierarchy is not quite as strong as it should be. The biggest problem probably is the fact that people don't work in consistent teams. They don't get to know people as well as they should. And so therefore they don't feel that they've got somebody they can speak to. So I think having somebody who is recognised for them as either a mentor or a support is useful. And of course the Speak Up Guardians are an important part of that as well.
Sticking one last question, which is, what do you think has been the main area that needed to be updated in good medical practice?
I think there has been a lot of discussion about the way we communicate as a profession, and a lot of the things that we've been talking about that have been embedded in good medical practice, good communication with patients. I think that needs to be more widely looked at, as well as the culture in which we're working.
Fantastic. Well, a fantastic start to the morning. Carrie, thank you so much.
Thank you.